Well, hello and welcome to West Country Wanderings. Got a bit of a cracker for you today. Lots of interest, historical interest. We're back here in Gloucestershire, in the Cotswolds. We're in the southern part of the Cotswolds. We're here in fact at a village called Woodchester, which is divided into two parts. This South Woodchester and North Woodchester. We're currently in North Woodchester. We have a Roman villa for you nonetheless. In fact, the biggest Roman villa in the United Kingdom. We also have an interesting church. We also have another church which is Grade 1 listed. Besides that, we have a beautiful village in a stunning landscape. So why not join me here on West Country Wanderings discovering Woodchester. Now, what you see behind me are the remains of St Mary's Church. Now, St Mary's Church was built on the site of a previous Saxon church, and this church here, on this site here, in this graveyard, was abandoned in 1883. Why was it abandoned? Well, the church was too small for its congregation because Woodchester was expanding in terms of the mills. We have a valley, deep valley here, and like a lot of the Cotswolds towns, we're about 2 miles south of the town of Stroud. It expanded through the mill trade. Lots of mills grew up and the population grew. So this church was no longer big enough for the congregation that it served. So a new church was built, which we'll go and have a look at later, some 1/3 of a mile south of where I currently stand. So this was abandoned. Now, why was this church built here in the first place? Well, it has origins of a Saxon church, and the reasons the Saxons built it in either the 8th or the 9th century was because the Romans are here. And why were the Romans here? Well, we'll go and have a look. Beneath my feet here lies probably the most famous Roman villa in Europe, if not the world. In fact, this is the biggest Roman villa in existence in the United Kingdom, but of course you can't see it. So what I'm going to do now is insert a couple of photographs to show you what it's like when this is uncovered, and I'll tell you a little more about when it was uncovered and why it's not uncovered now. In 1973, I was at a primary school in Stroud, just 2 miles to the north of here. And one day in 1973, we had a school trip to this very spot, because at that time, this Roman villa was uncovered for all to see. In fact, that year, 140,000 people came to see this Roman villa. But why was it covered up again? Well, for one thing, it was for its own protection. The fact that it was covered for lots, hundreds and thousands of years after the Romans left the United Kingdom meant that it was very, very well preserved. But in 1973, it was also excavated and researched thoroughly. As we said, the mosaic is the largest in Great Britain, and because of that it is known as the Great Pavement, but it's also known as Orpheus because of the design. I'll insert that again now so you can see why it's called Orpheus. Now, it was extensively uncovered in the 1790s by one Samuel Lysons. Now, he wrote an extensive book about it. Now, that book is currently very rare and hard to obtain, although there are some fragments of it in the British Museum, so we do know something of what he did uncover. Indeed, there are some engravings, and I think I found a couple of them. I think it was the University of Cambridge website, so I'll insert those now as well to show you what he did. So he did a lot of research into this. So what he uncovered about this pavement was that it was actually part of an extensive villa spreading out much further. So obviously you have to imagine that these gravestones weren't there then, and the villa pushed out behind me. There is a vineyard growing grapes behind me, and it's possible that there were also grapes growing here in Roman times as well, for reasons I'll mention later. And that grew out all this side right down to the edges of the present North Woodchester village. Now, since Samuel Lysons did his excavation in the 1790s, the limestone pavement here has only been opened 3 times to the general public. The first time was in 1951, and the reason for that was to link in with the big celebration in the United Kingdom. It was kind of a post Second World War celebration called the Festival of Britain, and there was lots of events going on, lots of cars building on Britain's history. So they reopened this villa then to show the general public what we had to offer in terms of history. It was opened again in 1961 and finally again in 1973, and sadly it hasn't been opened ever since. You're probably thinking, well, why? Well, one of the reasons for that is that these gravestones were currently in consecrated ground. Now this of course was the site, as we've said, of St Mary's Church, and although St Mary's Church isn't here and it's been moved, and as I say we'll go and have a look at that shortly, it is still consecrated ground, and a lot of people that have relatives buried here are concerned about the opening of the villa again, because it is possible that it will disturb some of these gravestones. Now thankfully there is a bit of a spark of good news, is that around the time of 1973 an artist recreated the mosaic and did a full replica of it, and I think it was around 2010-2011. Unfortunately this replica was sold to a private collector, but there are lots of rumours that this fantastic replica could be coming back once more to its rightful home here in Gloucestershire. So let's hope it does come back to one of the museums. I think probably the best museum fittingly would be the Corinium Museum in Cirencester, where a lot of the Roman artefacts are kept. But it would be brilliant to see that on show for the public to see, in light of the fact you can't actually see what is beneath my feet now. Now behind me is the present church of St Mary's, which was built by the architect S.S. Toulon, a London-based architect who designed a lot of the churches in Gloucestershire, Worcestershire and Warwickshire. And indeed we've come across S.S. Toulon. Sorry, I can't remember what S.S. stands for. I think the first S is Samuel. I'll stick it in below. I won't try and guess. We've come across him before when I did a video about Charlcote Park. I went to the nearby village of Hampton Lucy, and in fact it says Toulon designed the fabulous church there. So we're going to have a look inside this church here, St Mary's in Woodchester. Now, after visiting the new, well, relatively new St Mary's Church in Woodchester, I was about to make my way over to South Woodchester to visit the Roman Catholic Church, more of which in a bit. But before I did that, I was a little puzzled to references to the Priory. Now, the church that we're going to see, which is the Roman Catholic Church of the Annunciation, is known as the Priory, and I thought it was something to do with that. But there was a road mentioned here and a reference to an old priory estate in this field that I'm currently standing, so I was a bit curious. Added to which, in the point of doing research for this video, I was reading lots and lots of different papers and trying to piece it all together, because it is quite a complicated jigsaw. I came across a vague reference to some Roman stones in the Priory wall. Now, I thought that was the Priory, which is some 1 mile or 1.5 miles south of here, near the town of Nailsworth, where we're going to have a look shortly. But in fact, it isn't, and I think I found something really interesting. But before I do that, I'm just going to show you something else. There's a small spring here, and there's a couple of reasons to mention that. Is the water in Woodchester is the reason it became prosperous, because of the mills. There is the main A46 road that we've mentioned many times before. It goes up through Evesham, Alcester, and on to Leicester and beyond, and it also goes down to Bath the other way, of course. And the reason that's important is because the valley along here, where the A46 runs, is where the industrial part of Woodchester is, where the mills are. It's quite noisy with the traffic, so I probably won't film down there today. But we have this stream. And the reason I mention the stream is because that water is important for irrigation, for the crops, and also for vineyards, for irrigation. Now, there were a lot of vineyards around Woodchester, and almost certainly in Roman times, and they were certainly mentioned in the Domesday Book. Now, if you look at my first vlog that I did, my very first vlog, which was possibly August, vlog number 1. If you go into vlogs under my YouTube channel, you'll see vlog number 1 there. And I show you the vineyard at Stonehouse. Now, the one at Stonehouse is linked to the one here at Woodchester. It's run by Woodchester Farms Limited. They're all part of the same company. And Stonehouse also had a vineyard mentioned in the Domesday Book too. It's a very fertile landscape because we're on well-drained soils. We do have a water supply that is well-drained. We have southern slopes, we have the sun, and the soil is of the right type for growing grapes. White grapes, but it's a really good wine. I know that because I bought a bottle from my dad not long ago, and he said it was a good one. I don't drink alcohol myself. The reason I mention this spring, the other reason I mention it, is because of this in front of it. Now, this looks like it used to be a ford that went across the spring, but it's just the stones in it. The stones in front of it look very old, and I'll just do a close-up of that. So what you have behind me is the old Priory here at North Woodchester, not to be confused with the Priory we're going to have a look at shortly. Now, I'm not sure how much of the current buildings are on the site. It is all private, so I can't give a close-up view, so it's quite private. Very extensive property. There's lakes, swimming pools, tennis courts, all that kind of thing you'd associate with certain parts of the Cotswolds. Yeah, we've got all that here. But I don't know how much of the current buildings were part of the previous Priory, and I also can't find out much information to do with that Priory and how much of it was linked to either the Roman villa, and of course the Roman villa would have probably extended across towards where that Priory was, or indeed the previous St Mary's Church, not the one we just looked at, but the one we saw the remains of when we talked about the Roman villa, and indeed the previous Saxon church which would have been on that site. So what I wanted to show you was this stone here, as I saw mentioned in one of the research items from a book in the 1960s, I can't even remember who wrote it, they said to look at the old Priory wall. And of course, this is the old Priory wall with the Priory just behind it. And we have this stone here. And all I can make out in the stone is the letters PK. Now this could well be Roman. I'm not saying it definitively is Roman, but it's quite potentially Roman because of the location of it and the fact that there was a Roman villa which extended beyond the pavement that we talked about on this site here at Woodchester. I do apologise for the road noise. We're just right next to the busy A46, the Bath, Evesham, you know, that one, road. Just wanted to point out this. We're here at South Woodchester now. Nailsworth, the town, lies just about a half mile round there. The Catholic church, which I wanted to show you, which is the Grade 1 listed building, which is the links to Woodchester Mansion. I'll show you that in a bit. But this cross here was the very first war memorial in the entire country. And obviously if you go around towns and villages in the United Kingdom, you will see many war memorials. Indeed, when we did the Plymouth Hoe video, you saw that very extensive naval memorial there and lots of other memorials too. But this predated all of those. And the plaque here says it was actually built between 1916 and 1917. So it was actually done before the end of the First World War, which makes it pretty unique. Now this war memorial to the fallen was built here to commemorate all of those people that lost their lives, that were from all of the 5 Stroud valleys. So Stroud, the town, is made up of 5 valleys that radiate from it, and all of the people that lost their lives lived locally in these parts here in the Stroud Valleys area. So this here is at South Woodchester. Now in 1859 a monastery was added here too, and the reason that happened was William Lee had made a promise to a prior he had met when he was involved in the Tractarianism movement. And because of that, this monastery was built. And if you remember, when I did the Woodchester Mansion video, I mentioned that I have got a personal connection to this monastery that was here. I'll say was, I'll come on to that in a minute, because my father's uncle was a monk and he was based here at this very monastery in the 1960s. Sadly, at the end of the 1960s, there was a fire and the monastery burnt down. I'll insert some of the photographs around about now so you can see what the monastery and the fact it was attached to the church, what that looked like, because the 2 designs blended into the one harmonious looking building. And sadly it burnt. The church remained intact, but the monastery was demolished in 1970. However, I'm in the car park of the church at the moment, and if you look around the car park you can see remains of that very monastery. So we'll go and have a look at that now. So as well as that pile of stones that I was sat on there, which would have made up part of the original monastery, as I say, I'm standing in the car park now. We have a line of stones here, and if you follow me over here, there's the remains of a wall. So this would have formed part of the monastery's building here. So that's now the main entrance to the car park. It is gated for reasons I'll come on to shortly. And there it is, just along there. Now, so I'm not sure if those steps there would have been the original steps making their way into the monastery or not. It's difficult to work that out. There is something interesting here though. And it's his cross. Nothing unusual about a cross in a graveyard, you may say. I'll read what it says and give you a little bit more explanation. In loving memory of the Poor Clare Franciscan Sisters of Woodchester Convent, 1860 to 2010, together with 10 orphans, 1890, 1920, 5 relatives and friends, 1985, 1999, requiescant in pace, which is Latin for rest in peace. And the reason that's significant is that, as well as being a Priory number 1, I'll call it St Mary's Old Church by the Roman Villa and the Priory here. And the church, the new church of St Mary's, the remains of the old St Mary's, and this Gothic revivalist style church, Roman Catholic church here in South Woodchester, there was another Roman remains here, religious remains here in Woodchester, and that was the convent. Now, this convent closed in 2010, and it has had a very checkered history since then. It became a restaurant, a cafe, a nightclub, and a music venue, and it did attract some quite big artists, but sadly 2 people that owned it went bankrupt, and now it lies in ruins. I was going to film there, but there are big gates around it, and sadly the site has had a lot of vandalism, so it's not a very photogenic place at all. So yeah, this is the church that William Lee had built, and you can see there are some big similarities to the Woodchester mansion building, although this is in a more restrained style than that building, obviously, because this is has a purely religious functionality. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's tour of Woodchester, North and South Woodchester, here in the Stroud Valleys in the Cotswolds in Gloucestershire. I certainly found it fascinating revisiting the Roman villa site after all these years. I was only 9 years old when I was at primary school and went to see that, and it's great to see it again, although of course it's a little bit sad you can't actually see the villa itself, but hopefully that replica will move to this part of the world again, and people will then be able to go to one of the local museums and then get a feel for what that fantastic mosaic, indeed the biggest mosaic, and I've just read, not just in the UK, but also north of the Alps. So anything like in the Mediterranean, there's obviously bigger villas. There's nothing as big in terms of complete remains anywhere north of that line of the Alps in Europe, which is absolutely tremendous. So it'd be great to see that replica to show people what that Orpheus mosaic was like. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the complex history of the 2 churches here as well, here in Woodchester, and I hope you enjoyed that along. Anyway, until next time, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves. Please consider a like, a share, perhaps a comment below, particularly if you know about Roman connections in your part of the world, or you've got interesting church histories where you live. I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, until next time, take care. Cheers now. Bye bye.